These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal, Television for Agricultural Business Decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you very much for joining us today on Market Journal. Wheat stem sawfly is on the move, and we'll have some information on that with Extension Educator Julie Peterson a bit later in the show. The annual TAPS competition was underway in North Platte this past week. We'll get an update on the markets as well and check in on weather with Eric Hunt. We'll get to all of those stories coming up here in a few moments, but during the growing season, we like to begin with our in-the-field updates as we head out and about. Last week, storms made their way through portions of northeast Nebraska, and some areas were impacted by tornadoes. We had a chance to catch up with a producer who is dealing with the aftermath of one of those storm systems. My colleague at the Rural Radio Network, Chad Moyer, is standing by with this update. Chad?
It was an exciting and tense weekend in northeast Nebraska as a storm front that went through the area brought along with it several tornadoes. And we're visiting with one of the farmers who was affected by the tornado, or the tornado went over some of the ground that he farms. He is Mark Weeman from southeast Stanton County. Mark, thanks for visiting with us here today. We'll get to the storms over the weekend in just a moment. But first of all, if you could just tell me, how did the spring go for you guys as we talk about this update here this week?
Well, this area right through here like that, we experienced 2 years of back-to-back, severe drought. And going into this spring, we had not picked up a lot of moisture. After the snows melted off in the winter, everything stayed dry. And so we were going to sow some oats and alfalfa like that. And our biggest concern was would we even get enough moisture to germinate the stuff. We had to dish some corn stalks, and we got the crop sown, and then we just sat there and hoped that we get, some timely rains, and we got a ½ inch and kind of got things rolling. But then it got awful cold, and we did lose some alfalfa, and we did lose some oats from freeze out. So, but then after that, once the planting season got into late April and May and like that, we started picking up timely rains, and now we're to the point where we kind of maybe like to have a little bit of break so we can finish fertilizing corn and get the spraying wrapped up. But we did get all the hay put up in good shape. And so we've been very fortunate compared to the previous 2 years.
Yeah. So just rough estimate, how has the spring recharge been water-wise? How much moisture have you had?
Well, it all depends. The east side of our farming operation probably has had 6-7 inches of maybe towards 8 total inches of moisture. On this side, we probably almost doubled that, but we had some awful punishing rains on this side. A lot of field erosion, a lot of water's run off. So we'll see how those stands are going to fare as far as shallow-rooted corn and stuff like that going forward. So it's once again, it's location.
Sure. What about planting progress? Did it take several chunks to get the crops, the corn and soybean, planted this year?
Yes, we got off to a good start in late April, getting some beans in first. And then we got a little bit of corn in, and then all of a sudden we kind of turned wet and cold. And we had about a 2-week window in there. We really didn't turn a wheel at all. And then after that, it kind of straightened out, and we kind of were able to push through. But there were rain delays. But, people around here just said you just basically shut up and put up with it, because compared to the previous 2 years, it was no fun, planting in the dust. And, so it's been a tough area to farm through here the last couple of years.
Yeah. Tell me about the stand establishment. Once you did get all of that, all of the corn and soybeans in the ground, how did the crops come up?
Basically, I was really amazed. I thought maybe with some of the colder issues early and then some of the moisture that we were followed by sunlight and some hard driving winds where the ground kind of crusted even in no-till. And in the end, we got just enough timely showers here and there that the crops all made it through in good shape. And throughout the entire area, I think the stands are really good until the washing rains kind of, took some of that out and changed that. But no, I think the stand establishment in our area was good.
Okay, have you had to deal with any bugs or diseases or anything like that here so far?
So far, the only problem we had with bugs is early on, the alfalfa had to be sprayed several weeks prior to it being harvested because it loaded up with insects, worms, and aphids and stuff like that. We had to spray alfalfa. But other than that, no problem with the beans, no problem with the corn. Now, neighbor did tell me over here that he spotted some caterpillars, woolly caterpillars in his bean field, so he had to put some insecticide in for that and like that. But we're all kind of watching for that right now. But as far as anything else, no, it's going pretty darn good.
All right.
So,
well, let's talk about the weekend's events. And you mentioned that there have been several rains, Mark, that have kind of beaten the ground in this area. And this past weekend, tornadoes in the Howells and Clarkson area, near Pilger, and up to Pender as well. I guess just tell me the tornadoes from last weekend, how did it affect your operation?
Actually, our operation, we got off pretty darn good. The farm right west of here, it came all the way through that quarter. That was soybeans that are planted over there. We're going to probably have to go in that quarter. It would take a planter, and where the tornado path went, it piled up corn stalks. It also stripped a lot of the beans. They're not going to come back, so we're going to have to fill in some stand. But overall, we fared okay. But we're standing in a location here where the guy that owns this acreage amongst our farm ground didn't fare so well. And there's been storm damage here the last couple of years, too, from tornadoes with pivot damage and everything else in the area. So it's been kind of a rough haul.
All right, thank you for that report, Chad. We'll have more updates on crop progress as the growing season rolls along across the heartland. Earlier this week, the West Central Extension Education Center in North Platte hosted the 2024 TAPS Field Day. TAPS stands for Testing Ag Performance Solutions. The day was filled with activities such as soil moisture sensor demonstrations, as well as some market insights. Market Journal's Bill Dodd caught up with the Extension Educator Chuck Burr, who leads some of those efforts out at the West Central Ag Lab, and he brings us this story about how TAPS is impacting agriculture here in Nebraska.
Earlier this week, producers converged on the West Central Extension and Education Research Center in North Platte, Nebraska, to take part in the Summer TAPS Field Day. But what is TAPS? TAPS stands for Testing Ag Performance Solutions. This friendly competition has gained traction throughout Nebraska and surrounding states while shaping producers' perceptions on what the best practices available are for their particular operations.
Our annual report, we call it our banquet report. We hand that out in January. It's got the results of all the competitions. And I know quite a few people that just read that report. In a survey, they told us it's the Bible. So when they want to learn about, doing decisions, making decisions in TAPS, that's the Bible. I've actually run into a couple people that have read the report. They've never been to one of our events, have never participated in TAPS, but they read our report religiously every year, and they've made changes in their farming operation just based on what they've read in that report.
With most of the competitions at or near capacity for this summer, for teams participating in this year's TAPS competition, there will be some additional variables participants will need to be familiar with, as well as a new soybean competition being conducted at the Eastern Nebraska Extension and Education Center near Meade.
Yeah, so this is our 7th year we've done the sorghum competition in TAPS. We moved a grant at the Stump International Wheat Center a couple of years ago, and this is the first year in quite a while we've done an irrigation decision. So participants will have to be watching soil moisture, watching weather and rainfall, and then decide if they want to irrigate or not. So we have 4 different competitions at 3 different locations in Nebraska this year. Well over 70 participants. All the competitions are full, so we're pretty excited about that. We did add the soybean competition at NREC up by Meade this year, so that's new. But yeah, the irrigation decision here in Grant, and really looking at the response of sorghum to irrigation and rainfall. This part of the state, so irrigation water is pretty critical because we don't get a lot of rainfall. So it'll be pretty exciting to look at the results this next fall.
TAPS has partnered with a number of ag tech companies for this program. One of the biggest upside the teams participating in the TAPS competition is the ability for participants to use and become familiar with new on-farm technologies at no cost to the producer.
Yeah, so what we try to do in TAPS is expose our participants to a variety of different technologies. In the background, you might be able to see some soil moisture sensors out here already. We provide satellite imagery. We'll take leaf samples as we get close to tassel and heading and provide that to the participants. Of course, soil test information, just giving them a lot of information to help them make more informed decisions. We've seen quite a few of our participants cut their nitrogen rates quite a bit, some of them up to 50 pounds per acre. So some pretty significant reductions. And also irrigation water. We've seen a wide range in terms of how much water is being applied by the participants. And I think it all goes back to not trusting that technology. We've got the research that shows the technology is proven. They just need to get that exposure or that experience in the TAPS competition. And we've had some survey results showing about 75% of our participants start adopting that technology on their farming operation after they've competed in TAPS. Yeah, TAPS really gives them the opportunity to try out this technology at no cost and no risk. So if they trust the technology, maybe it didn't work out the way they thought it does. Maybe they don't win the award because they didn't have a great yield, but they didn't lose any money on the farming operation. So really no risk environment and no cost to them too. We don't want to charge a cost to them because we want them to try that technology, get comfortable with making decisions based on that technology, and then again, adopt it back at home.
15% of the time.
Whether or not you participate in this competition, TAPS is an ever-evolving competition that is continually evolving management practices for participants. Reporting from Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks for that story, Bill. If you'd like to learn more about the TAPS competition, or you'd like to see some of the results from the competition from past years, go ahead and visit their website. It's easy to remember. It's taps.unl.edu. It is now time to check in on markets. This week joining the show is Luke Beckman from Central Valley Ag, as I had a chance to visit with him on Thursday morning. Here's our conversation. Luke, it's good to have you back here on the program. We appreciate you joining us. Let's kind of size up what's been happening, particularly in the corn and soybean markets over the past week or so. How do you see things?
Bryce, we have to go back to the June WASDE report, which happened a couple weeks ago. And that was really a copy and paste report by the USDA. We didn't see any changes to the domestic corn balance sheet, and we saw the crush reduction on the soybean side. Absent of anything bullish in that report, we're just sitting here biding time until we get to next Friday's set of data. That's going to be the planted acreage and quarterly grain stocks reports due out on June 28th. So these markets with no weather premium in the marketplace have done nothing but chop sideways. And as we sit here today, new crop soybeans making new lows for the calendar year. So it's been tough sledding for the bulls during this time period with really nothing bullish to chew on, just waiting for new data inputs, next Friday.
Let's talk kind of on the corn front to start with. The managed money, or the funds as they're often called. Remind me, where do they sit in the futures market, and how might that, what could that tell us about their position and where the markets might go because of it?
If you remember earlier this year, they had actually set a new record short in the corn market, 340,000 contracts. That was a new record for us. And basically when they're doing that, they're selling paper positions, and that selling pressure will push the markets lower. We did see a reprieve in that activity as we got into the spring, and that's really been our best pricing opportunities looking backwards, of course, was during the month of May. And since that time period, we've seen them build that short position back up again. And so now we sit here as of last Friday's Commitment of Traders report back beyond 200,000 contracts net short by managed money. We've seen the wheat market perform really poorly over that stretch of time as well, after making highs on May 28th, down over 20% just in 3 weeks. And so corn and soybeans have kind of followed that same move as we've seen managed money pile into short positions really in all of the asset classes, corn, soybeans, and wheat. So they really are not perceiving any supply side risks as we sit here today with the corn and soybean markets, and wheat certainly changed too. As we see some better than expected yields coming off as wheat harvest rolls north. So not a lot for the bulls to chew on, and it's been very easy for managed money to push this market lower by adding to those short positions.
Good point. Glad you brought that up. Let's talk about that WASDE report, and I guess you pointed out old crop demand. You say it's likely better than what USDA showed in that report. What makes you say that?
Yeah, that June WASDE was a copy and paste, like we mentioned. A lot of people very optimistic that old crop corn demand is better than what the USDA is advertising today. Maybe not a surprise that they waited to make many material adjustments in that June WASDE report. And the reason is we have that quarterly grain stocks report coming up next Friday. They'll use that data that the National Ag Statistics Service publishes to help them glean what feed and residual demand should be for any changes that they would like to make to their July WASDE, which will come up July 12th. But I would expect that corn exports have been very counter-seasonal. We've seen some nice late season strength that maybe we weren't expecting. Shipments have been doing very well. We had another good export sales report, this week. So corn exports, we would largely expect there to be a bump in that July WASDE report. And corn ethanol demand has been very good. Had a Department of Energy report out today. Another good week of ethanol disappearance, corn disappearing into the ethanol channels. So between corn ethanol, between exports, we should see those demand categories tick higher. And feed and residual has the possibility to be adjusted higher as well. So all things considered, old crop carryout on corn, we should expect to see that number come under 2 billion bushels, which is kind of a psychological victory, I think, for the corn market, although certainly corn supplies aren't tight by any means. But moving in the right direction on that old crop carryout would certainly help. And if you could combine some sort of a weather story as we get into July, you might have the makings for a little bit of a rally in this corn market with the right conditions.
To your point about the weather story, oftentimes we look out our front or back door, and that's kind of how we imagine things going. It's a big country, though, in terms of the Corn Belt, where corn, soybeans are primarily being grown. As you look across the United States, any areas of concern?
There's a few pockets. This week, of course, we're dealing with some heat as you get into the eastern Corn Belt, Illinois, Indiana, those areas. We've also had some excess water in spots. I think you get into southern Minnesota, you're certainly hearing about pockets of areas that have holes. They're drowned out up through there, up through Wisconsin, and they're forecasted to get more rain. If you think back to 2019, that was a year where we did see excessively wet weather. And unfortunately, those stories take time to really play out. They show up in quarterly grain stocks reports maybe next year where we see a quality issue with the crop. You're not going to see those types of things show up next Friday in the planted acreage report because those acres got planted. So they're being impacted now, maybe by excess weather, wet weather, but it does take a while for those types of things to play out. So we should start to see some of that show up in your crop condition reports that come out on Monday afternoons. I would expect we'll see a couple point decline in our good to excellent rating and maybe a couple points higher in the poor to very poor categories next Monday when we see the crop condition ratings.
Coming up next week, we'll be joined in person by Heather Ramsey with the ARC Group. If you have a question you'd like me to ask Heather, go ahead and email us or get in touch on social media, and I will pass your question right along over to Heather. Well, we all know that Nebraska is one of the most irrigated states in the country. However, get this, according to the latest census of agriculture, they say Nebraska lost about 600,000 acres of irrigated cropland. We know this isn't really possible, and there's many reasons why this figure seems inaccurate. Looking at varied sources, including the Census of Ag, the National Agricultural Statistics Service, Nebraska's NRDs, and even the Nebraska Department of Revenue, it is a fact that Nebraska is still irrigating around 9 million acres and continues to be one of the top irrigation states in the nation. You can learn more about how many acres are under irrigation here in the Cornhusker State by checking this story out. It's the June issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It is now time to get a look at what's happening with weather with Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, some folks in the state still looking for rain, while others say, at least at this point, they've had enough. How are things shaping up as we turn to the week ahead?
Thanks, Bryce. Definitely some chances of rain for most everybody in the state this week. Starting off with, though, on Monday, it's going to be very, very warm across the state. Temperatures at least the 90s, probably even getting to lower 100s across the Kansas border and in parts of the Panhandle. As we move to Tuesday, that ridge should move a little bit further toward the west, and there is a short wave moving into the upper Midwest that should actually give the potential for some severe thunderstorms, or at least thunderstorms across portions of the western Corn Belt on Tuesday. Right now, the WPC is not real bullish on precipitation, but this may be a dud. It may actually be a lot better than this Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Something to pay attention to. As we move toward later in the week, we'd actually see another disturbance moving across the northern plains of the southern Canadian prairies. That should back up the temperatures a little bit and should also bring a chance of rain for pretty much the entire state. Certainly the eastern two-thirds of the state stand a good chance of seeing some pretty good precipitation amounts. And right now, the European ensemble shows a relatively good chance of 1 inch of more moisture in the next 7 to 10 days. That's actually going out through next Saturday. Very greatest chances across north central Nebraska. We're likely to see some of this before you see this on Saturday morning. The CPC 8 to 14 day outlook getting into about the 4th of July shows a good chance of above average precipitation for pretty much the entire central U.S. This is, at least for eastern Nebraska and into the upper Midwest, this is shown on the European model as being relatively wet, showing a little bit drier across portions of Panhandle where you don't want it to be any drier than what it has been. This also is mimicking the GFS with maybe showing relatively wet conditions across most of the central U.S. In terms of temperatures, the CPC in the 8 to 14 day outlook shows relatively warm temperatures across pretty much the entire U.S. except for the Pacific Northwest, with the warmest temperatures off to our southwest and on the East Coast. The European model keeps us relatively warm in this time period, but the GFS keeps western Nebraska warm, though it's probably showing some troughing into the central United States as we head toward the 4th of July. So if this verifies, it may actually be at least somewhat more pleasant by the time we get to the early July time frame. Towards the drought monitor, some good news is we did see the eradication of the final bit of drought across southeastern Nebraska. Unfortunately, we had some drought introduced across portions of the Panhandle where we've been quite dry in the last 60 days. So Scottsbluff up toward Harrison, the last 60 days, we're running 2 to 3 inches short of normal. And again, in that part of the state, that's relatively significant. Other dry pockets include southern Lancaster County, parts of Holt County, and parts of Cherry County. In terms of veg dry, also shows relatively dry conditions across most of the western portion of the state, particularly kind of between Scottsbluff and Banner counties, which has had a relatively dry signal on veg dry for about the last month. Precipitation, heaviest amounts in Falls City, around Norfolk, and up toward just east of Valentine, and out in Garden County. And soil moisture, generally speaking, we are in the near normal percentile range for most of the state, with a couple of pockets of drier soils across southwestern Nebraska, and certainly out here in the Panhandle where we've been driest. Very, very wet in the upper Midwest and drying out very quickly here across the eastern Corn Belt. Good news report on the stress degree days. Nothing significant report just yet across Nebraska. We'll see if this accelerates the next couple of weeks. It was a cool morning across most of the Panhandle yesterday morning with temperatures in the 40s, and some places even dipping into the mid-30s. Soil temperatures mostly in the mid-60s to the mid-70s statewide, and this is our temperature and precipitation roundup for the last 7 days. Thanks. Back to you, Bryce.
Good update there, Eric. We do appreciate it. Finally today, wheat stem sawfly flights have peaked as a new report shows some southward expansion of the pest into western Nebraska counties. Market Journal's Mike Straub has more on this development. Mike?
The wheat stem sawfly has emerged throughout the High Plains. Adult flights will likely peak soon. Wheat stem sawfly surveys conducted from 2011 to 2017 indicated that the pest was staying within the panhandle of Nebraska. However, there have been a presence of wheat stem sawfly in Keith County. It is possible that the insect has expanded to other parts of southwest and west central Nebraska.
Wheat stem sawfly definitely is emerging right now, flying around. The females are laying their eggs into the stems of the wheat. One thing for this year, we are actually starting to see this pest a little bit further outside of the panhandle than we traditionally have. So normally this wheat stem sawfly has stayed in the panhandle region of the state. Unfortunately, we're now starting to see it down into Keith and Perkins County as well. Certainly if you're in that area, southwest, west central part of the state, and you believe you've seen this small wasp-like insect in your wheat, please let Extension know. We'd like to kind of better document where it's currently found in the state. The wheat stem sawfly is small and wasp-like in appearance. It has a black and yellow kind of striping on it. And this time of a year, whenever it's nice and warm out, they're going to be active flyers. Moving through with a sweep net in your wheat field is the best way to try to find them.
Many growers have tried different tools, tactics, and strategies to help manage or offset the impact of the wheat stem sawfly. Planting solid-stemmed varieties seem to be one of the best protections against the wheat stem sawfly. Planting trap crops can be another option.
This is a difficult insect to control. We know that since the adults are flying and laying eggs for such a long period of time, you can't really find one good time to spray an insecticide to control it. One of our best protections against the insect is planting solid-stemmed or partially solid-stemmed varieties. There's also some cultural practices, destroying some of the stubble where they overwinter along the edges of the fields, and looking at trap crops can be options. For the trap cropping, an option could be around the outside of your field to plant something like barley, oats, or triticale that would be attractive to those wheat stem sawfly, and then would hopefully then lead to less damage in your wheat itself. You could also plant those solid stem varieties of wheat around the outside of your field as well, that they can provide some protection.
Wheat stem sawfly girdling can result in the lodging of your wheat crop, which can knock your wheat to the ground. Wheat harvest can be greatly impacted if an infestation is severe.
It really can be quite impactful in areas where the populations are high, particularly in those panhandle regions of the state. So the larva tunnels down the stem and then girdles the base of the stem. So you can see significant lodging. It tends to be highest pressure along the edges of fields. And of course, in those areas, if you're not able to harvest those lodged stems, the yield losses can be very significant there.
If you believe you have a wheat stem sawfly infestation, from a production standpoint, there is not much you can do this growing season. It is recommended to gather information about which of your acres seem to have the highest sawfly infestations, and be timely in harvesting heavily infested fields. Reach out to UNL's Extension if any questions or concerns arise. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
If you'd like to learn more about wheat stem sawfly and perhaps get some advice on mitigating this pest from your fields, you can learn more by visiting cropwatch.unl.edu. Before we go, I want to remind you that next week on Wednesday, June 26th, Nebraska Extension is set to host their annual Weed Management Field Day out at the South Central Ag Lab near Clay Center. The Market Journal team will be packing up and taking this show on the road, bringing us up the highlights from the event. If you do see us out and about near Clay Center, be sure to stop us and say hi. That's going to do it for this week's broadcast. Keep in mind, if you missed a story, you can always follow Market Journal on YouTube as well as our various social media accounts. We'll hope to see you back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.